I think, yeah, welcome to this evening's Independent Socialists in Wellingborough Zoom event with Mary Mellor, who's with us this evening. Is somebody who's well, Mary's going to has invited me to read her paper, but that I'm going to introduce her as to who she is, and then invite her to say a few words of introduction. We're very pleased that and delighted that Mary's been able to come to this this Zoom meeting by ISW. She is Professor Emeritus at Northumbria University in Newcastle, and her research and active involvement in cooperatives was on social economy and the ecofeminist movement, and was involved in writing about Greenham Common. She abandoned formal politics, like a number of us. A number of us here have done likewise, and she was a Labour co-op councillor, but gave up being a councillor in 1979 in favour of what she describes as theoretical practice, which is envisaging a feminist green socialism. She wrote a book, Breaking the Boundaries Towards a Feminist Green Socialism, which was published by Virago in 1992. And she also wrote a book, Feminism and Ecology, in 1997. She's also led and done an extensive work on radical potential for the democratisation of money. And she's written two books, The Future of Money in 2010 and Debt or Democracy in 2016. And her most recent book is just simply called Money, for which she's going to talk about this evening in the context of public money and the theme of public money as a route to eco-socialist feminism. And Mary, if you'd like to just introduce yourself briefly while I get your speech ready, and then I'll start to read what you'd want to say. So over to you, Mary, and welcome to Wellingborough, albeit by a Zoom.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Yes, my academic life fell into two halves, really. The social economy and the ecofeminism. And then I found that where I was looking for where radicalism could come from, which I think is where you're all looking for it as well. And I think the answer lies in the money system. So I've altogether contributed or written 4 books on money. It's not an easy topic. Even people who write in it often say it's taken me 20 years, and it certainly took me 20 years to sort it out. How far, when you hear what I've got to say, thank you to Paul for reading it and saving my voice. You know, I'm interested in what you think of how far I've got or not got in trying to find a radical route through the money system.
Thank you very much, Mary. There's no doubt that the issue of money is an extremely complex and difficult subject to understand. I studied economics at university many years ago, but I never really fully understood how money works. But what I'll do is I'll start to read what you've written, and that will hopefully provide some illumination onto this topic of money as a route to eco-socialist feminism. The first heading is that you've written is the crisis and contradiction of money. You say money is a critical element in modern capitalism. Rather than being a reflection of underlying commodity production, which I believe you've written M to C to M plus, and I assume that's the kind of the Marxist formulation of money, where money purchases commodities, and commodities are then sold, and that creates more money. Is that?
Yes, that's it.
That's it. So M to C to M plus. So money purchases commodities, commodities are then sold at a profit, and that creates more money.
Yeah,
which is bigger than the original amount. Sorry?
That's the wish.
That's the wish. But money now, this is the crux of your talk in essence, is money is increasingly being made out of money itself, i.e. money itself is replaced commodities. So money purchases money, and then that money purchases more money. Is that essentially the formulation, Mary?
It's the shift to finance capitalism rather than productive capitalism.
So money creates money.
Yes.
And that's the unique feature of money in a sense. You go on to say money is also in crisis, most notably the financial crash of 2007 and 8, when the ability of states to generate vast sums of new money, either directly through the Treasury or via notionally independent central banks, rescued the private finance sector. The importance of public money was made even more clear during the pandemic through the publicly funded furlough and quantitative easing, brackets QE, by the central bank. So again, in both these cases, the government created money and just printed money and handed it over to people through the furlough schemes, or handed it over to the banks. The central bank was created by the central bank but handed over to the private sector banks. The contradiction is that despite the concrete evidence of the sovereign power of the state to create money and the reliance of the private sector on it, the ideology of neoliberalism has totally captured the political imagination. The vast amount of new money created by the state has been obscured by referring to it as state borrowing. That would burden future generations, even as quantitative easing was in fact hoovering up private holdings of public debt. Rather than dire warnings about the increase in national debt, the more logical approach would be to cancel the debt held by the Bank of England as it is owed by the state to itself. And if I could add here that the Bank of England is, of course, part of the state, but it's owned by the government. So when the Bank of England creates money, or the state owes money to the Bank of England, it's owing money to itself. The next heading that Mary's is the weaponization of public money. Public funding has been weaponized by a superficially common sense neoliberal handbag economics that claims that the source of all money for public expenditure is the market. The image presented is public funding being taken from the pocket of hard-pressed private taxpayers. The public sector is portrayed as being like a household, having to live within its means to balance the books. States must not run deficits, get into debt, or print money. As money is always assumed to be in short supply, proposals for public spending inevitably met by a politically charged question, where's the money coming from? Those advocating new expenditure are accused of believing in the magic money tree. And of course, we've heard all this, haven't we? There's never any money. The government is always short of money to do things that we want it to do. This has so paralysed Labour that it has stopped putting forward any new policies at all in order to demonstrate its financial responsibility. This is the neoliberal trap that traps progressive policies in a catch-22. Public spending depends on taxing private wealth creation. Private wealth creation requires low taxation and minimal regulation. The public sector, therefore, cannot access that wealth, as this would mean increasing taxation, which would undermine wealth creation. So the neoliberal explanation is that there's this circular process whereby that you can't spend public money without taxing, and taxing reduces wealth, and therefore it undermines wealth creation. This then links to growth and austerity. As handbag economics dictates that states must not run deficits, get into debt or print money, the only way to expand the tax take is through growth of the market sector. In the absence of growth, or even worse, market contraction, public spending must be reduced through austerity, which has a major impact on public services, particularly welfare. The myth of neoliberalism. Myth number one, that money was invented by the market to ease trade. That's false. Money is as old as human society. It has taken many different forms: sticks, stones, shells, cloth. And its early use was for social purposes, for dowries, blood money, tribute. Neoliberal myth number two. Money's original and ideal form was gold and silver, with their own intrinsic value. This is partially true. Precious metal coinage was invented around 600 BC, but this long precedes capitalist markets and was mainly used to fight wars and build prestigious projects such as palaces. The weakness of precious metal coinage was its value, too valuable for daily use. Modern money is, in inverted commas, fiat. It has no value in itself. It is represented by a public currency which is no longer tied to reserves of precious metal, e.g. the gold standard. Today, only 3% of money in the UK is in physical form of notes and coins. The rest is held in bank accounts, and future money may well be completely digital. We've already moved, I mean, this is me speaking now, we've already moved in that direction. I mean, I don't carry cash anymore virtually. I carry a £10 in my wallet for emergencies, but mostly I use my card. So the money I'm using now is almost always digital. Money is only a representation of value. It gives us an agreed yardstick for setting or comparing value. E.g., this is worth £5, that is worth twice as much at £10. I owe you £20, not £30. It does not make sense to ask what is a pound worth except in relation to another currency.
So this would just protect it, put it on the ground.
Sorry, could somebody who's joined us, I think, please mute?
Yeah.
Hello. Hello.
I think she's muted.
Yeah, muted now. Oh. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, and I'm muted. Now I've unmuted, but I'll mute.
Yeah, sorry, I'm on my mobile phone, and it's I lost my own picture. There, I'm back now.
All right. Sorry, I'm late.
That's okay. It's just that initially there was a lot of background noise. Thank you. So just to repeat, money is only a representation of value. It gives us an agreed yardstick for setting or comparing value. This is worth £5, that is worth £10. I owe you £20. It does not make sense to ask what is a pound worth except in relation to another currency. Myth number three, that the market funds public expenditure or public spending. This ignores the fact that public spending is a major contributor to GDP, ranging from 30 to 50%. Also, the market is a very recent economic form, whereas state funding goes back thousands of years. So where does money come from? As money in itself does not exist, there are no money mines. A better way to ask this question is who or what can increase the money supply? There are two ways the money supply can be expanded: state spending and bank lending. Bank lending leads to state spending. Until very recently, it was assumed that banks were merely lending money deposited in them by savers. Critics pointed out that this meant that depositors couldn't get their money back on demand. Money couldn't be in two places at once. Conventional thinking tried to square the circle through theories such as fractional reserve banking, with the central bank as lender of last resort. It was not until earlier this century that bankers, e.g. the IMF, Bank of England, the Federal Bank in America, etc., conceded that bank lending was creating new money, not drawing down existing deposits. The political implications of this revelation about the money supply have yet to be addressed. As bank lending, personal, household, business, government debt, has become the main source of the money supply. A collapse in borrowing leads to a collapse in money supply. If borrowing slows, money disappears as existing debts are repaid. World debt underpins a substantial proportion of world wealth, e.g. private equity, investments made on borrowed money, mortgages. Debt-based money turbocharges inequality and financially excludes the poor. The need to repay debt with interest fuels growth, which could lead to ecological damage. The privatisation of the money supply. As commercial bank lending is licensed by the central bank, this implies there is a guarantee of public backing. This means the ability to create money has been privatised, while the responsibility for the money created falls on the state, e.g. the central bank's ability to create new money, new public money. As was found in the financial crash of 2007-8, the activities of licensed banks and the wider financial sector were so intertwined that central banks had effectively to fund the whole private sector. Failure to challenge this privatised money supply, together with the pumping of more publicly created money through quantitative easing, has vastly increased the size and power of the M to M plus circular process, that money purchases money, which then makes more money. This will inevitably lead to future crises of even greater magnitude. State spending. It is clear from state rescue of the private sector that governments can and do create new money. Government expenditure expands the supply of money, while the payment of taxes reduces it. Far from deficits, meaning expenditure not covered by taxes, being a burden on the populace, they provide a source of debt-free and tax-free money. Let me repeat that. I'll repeat that because I think this is quite an important statement by Mary. Far from deficits, expenditure not covered by taxes being a burden on the populace, they provide a source of debt-free and tax-free money. Challenging neoliberalism's trump card, state spending leads to hyperinflation. The evidence from the creation of public money during the pandemic is that even a vast creation of public money is not inflationary. In general, most public spending does not directly impact on prices. The public sector also returns a substantial amount of money in taxes. Perhaps if I could add that, of course, if you give people who pay taxes more money, they pay taxes on that money, so the money returns to the exchequer. But that's what. So I think, Mary, it's something like 30% of money that the government generates if it gives it to certain, it comes back to the Treasury through taxation.
Yes, and any interest we pay to the Bank of England goes straight to the Treasury as well. So if the government pays interest on its money it owes to the Bank of England, the Bank of England just gives the interest straight back again.
Yeah, because it, of course, owed to the Bank of England.
Yeah. Crazy.
So when, for example, I mean, if I add here, when workers ask, in the public sector, ask for a pay increase, something like 30% of any pay increase that they're granting will return to the government. So a 6% pay increase, something like 2% of that increase will return to the government anyway. So when the government say they can't afford pay increases to the public sector, they can't afford. They're not acknowledging that money flows back to them through the payment of income tax. However, quantitative easing has contributed to the inflation, to the inflation of financial assets, as it issues money directly into financial markets by buying up government debt. To avoid inflation, therefore, quantitative easing should be circulated via the public economy, not the private economy. But in fact, I think it's correct that quantitative easing is money that the government's created and just handed over to the banks.
Yeah, in the financial sector generally.
To the financial sector. If that another form of quantitative easing could be that you give the money in increased benefit payments to the poorest.
That would be the logic.
The logic of that would be, Mary, I think that it would help the poorest rather than the richest.
Absolutely, and that would not be inflationary because the poor don't create inflation.
So we now move on to a feminist green socialism for the 21st century. The crisis and contradiction of neoliberalism should provide the opportunity to achieve radical social change, but the political imagination is trapped by handbag economics. I think the reference to handbags there is Margaret Thatcher, isn't it?
Yes, it's named in honour of Margaret Thatcher's handbag.
Yes.
Conceived of at the time when she was around.
Who famously referred to the economy as running like a household economy,
yes,
and
exactly.
the importance of the handbag. So what Mary's suggesting is that the political imagination is trapped by handbag economics, the neoliberal handbag economics. What is needed is a socialism that meets the needs of the 21st century and challenges the privatized and debt-ridden money system. What ecofeminism adds to the socialist critique is the failure of the monetarized economy to acknowledge women's unpaid and underpaid reproductive labor and the free resource of nature. Putting women's work in the sphere of reproduction and ecologically sustainable as core priorities challenges the current allocation of monetary value. An eco-feminist socialist alternative to socially and ecologically damaging debt-based and profit-driven capitalism would be sufficiency provisioning enough for all within the limits of natural resources, where no one has too little or too much. Unlike production for profit and a money system based on debt, a feminist green socialism would democratize the creation and circulation of money to address the core needs of human well-being and planetary welfare. Wealth, as in W-E-L-L-T-H, so well, not wealth, as in W-E-A-L-T-H. So wellness, or wellness, as Mary says, not wealth. Thank you. That's what I've just read out, of course, is what Mary's written and asked me to read out. So, and that's the end of the of Mary's little speech delivered by myself. Mary, did you want to add anything at this point, or you?
No, I'm happy for people to raise questions or a debate among yourselves, and I'll listen to what you've got to say. I'm just very interested. You see, what is happening is loads and loads of people are criticising the neoliberal view of money. You know, you can't afford it, magic money trees, hand wringing, austerity, but nobody is. And lots of people are coming up with arguments similar to the ones I'm coming up with, different ways of looking at money, and it's been around. This has been going on now for at least nearly 20 years. Since people were starting to raise these questions about money, and people raised it long past in the last century, but it's been growing and growing and growing in this century, from the turn of the century to now, and yet we're not breaking through. Neoliberalism still has us in its jaws almost, and so basically people like myself are saying, I'm trying to simplify and get hold of the politics of money. That's what I think I'm writing, is a politics of money. This isn't to say I don't I have talk about the traditional socialist analysis of the exploitation of labour and all the rest. I'm not saying this is instead of that. It's just we're in a monetized world of capital, of finance capitalism, and therefore our theories have to move with finance capitalism as well as productive capitalism. Anyway, so any questions? I will lose my thread of thought when I'm answering questions if it goes on too long, because that's part of the breakdown I've got between my thinking and my speech. So I might get a bit lost at times. So if we keep questions as short as possible, then I can probably keep them.
Could I just ask people to use the symbol at the bottom of their screen if you want to speak, because I'm currently running this from my mobile phone. My computer's packed in. So I can only see those of you who want to speak if you raise your hand using the button at the bottom of the Zoom screen. And I see Wilkie, you've put your hand up. So if you'd like to unmute and come in straight away.
Thank you. Even if I did fully understand that, which I'm not sure I didn't, should Britain take such, UK, whatever, take such action, can socialism survive in one country? How would that play out abroad, particularly with, I suppose, political enemies?
Currencies are normally national, except for ones that are artificially constructed otherwise, so the euro, obviously, or ones that are globally dominant, like the dollar. But a lot of people working with theory as money say, if you're working within your own economy, you can't really, you can insulate yourself from external forces. Yanis Varoufakis in the Greek, when the Greeks were getting really screwed by the euro, he planned to run the economy through people's personal national insurance accounts, their taxation and national insurance accounts, which of course is you have to have one of those accounts to be able to participate in the economy, because people can't use money to buy into them or borrow and take them up. So I think there are ways you can use the money system to try and get democratic control of your local economy, whether it's a local within the society, like people are often setting up local money systems. But the most logical one is the national money system. And these are surprisingly strong. People have tried to form alternative currencies. Obviously, you've got things like Bitcoin trying, but national currencies, because it's not the moneyness of them that matters. It's the need for us all to agree to have a common language of money, which is what our currency is. We know we're using the same yardstick, and therefore I think it can insulate you from overseas interventions.
Thank you, because I think it's probably prompted by the question. We had a previous speaker who spoke about you avoiding all inflation by a system being paid in your own currency. I just wondered how that would happen, for example, again with Russia demanding being paid in rubles. Would that have any, for the Ukrainian grain or whatever, that should be paid in Ukraine, obviously, but I suppose that's this, or crux when you're buying materials from potentially hostile nations, because we haven't got autarky. We don't grow enough of our own food. We don't produce enough here.
Mm.
I would love to see the banking system you describe, but is there any contingencies in that system, or is that just assuming foreign states wouldn't care as long as they get paid?
Well, as long as they can exchange their your currency isn't much use to them unless they can turn it into another currency. The Russians can't use pounds in their own economy or dollars in their own economy.
No.
So in a sense, if you turn something into your currency and you get people to engage with your currency, then that gives you a sort of, like I said, an autonomy, but also a power. And therefore, so one of my Debt and Democracy, I address the policies about how do you run an international money system, and the IMF and oh, come on, who was it?
No.
The World Bank.
About the global currency. Oh gosh, my brain's gone. Sorry, I've lost that. I think that to answer your question, or not answer your question, this is complicated enough, modelling it on a country basis. Trying to model it on an inter-country basis, I mean, it can be done, but it's hard.
Mm. Thank you very much, Mary. We've got another Mary who wants to contribute now, and she's unmuted. Bob, if you could unmute and come after Mary.
I just wanted to say that modern monetary theory seems to be a secret. Hardly anyone mentions it or has heard of it. And I think all we can do is sort of petition the BBC, get in touch with other channels and ask them to produce TV programmes to explain it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, the Guardian, I'm forever trying to get the Guardian to acknowledge the existence of MMT, modern monetary theory.
Mm.
Although, much like radical movements anywhere, the radical money movements is fractured. There's different schools of thought, and to a certain extent, it's the fault of the MMT people that they tend to, as Larry Elliott of the Guardian said to me, they tend to be cultish. They tend to, you've got to be purists if you deviate from their model, which I do. They say all money is indebted money. They don't acknowledge that the public money can be created debt free. They have a model of money that's every credit it creates equivalent debt. And I've been researching money for 20 years or more, and I find some of modern monetary theory books difficult to read. But the one I would recommend is the one the Deficit Myth by Stephanie Kelton. If you haven't come across this, get hold of that, because she does highlight public money and what you could do if you could socialize money. And her book apparently is a bestseller. Which is really good, but it's still not breaking through. And I mean, a long time ago, when we first started in the early part of this century, when we were starting, Larry Elliott, I think it was, referred to MMT people as swivel-eyed, or the swivel-eyed crank monetarists. Mm. And so it was demonized by everybody. And yet there's this groundswell. Book after book after book is coming out that's analysing the financial sector, etc., and talking about money. There's endless books on money, and I think it must be like a dam at some point. It's going to crack, and it's all going to flood through, because who is actually defending neoliberal theories anymore? I mean, the students in economics departments were in revolt about the conventional neoliberal economics being foisted on them, neoclassical models. But I suppose to sum up one side, it is difficult. Money, because it doesn't really exist. I've always said it's the most social thing we've got, because there is no, particularly in modern money, there is no concreteness to it at all. It is a system of relationships and trust, and grasping that is quite hard. But it's a puzzle to me why. But I mean, how many people? you know, among you, you know, would understand, have got a grip on all of this. And you're thoughtful people that read radical presses, I dare say, and you know, it's frustrating. It really is frustrating. I think it's so hard. And modern monetary theory, I do think, has got a bit cultish and it's a bit precious about its ideas.
Oddly enough, MMT stands for magic money tree as well.
Yes, it's a very good point. Well, it is a magic money tree. I think bank money and state money are magic money trees, because you know that money doesn't come from anywhere. I said it's something that's from nowhere that becomes something. You know, it comes from nowhere, but it has such a tangible existence on our lives. I mean, where would we be without the money in your bank account or your pensions coming through? I mean, it's you know, it's terrifying if the money system collapsed. And of course, if you have civil, sorry, I won't go on.
I was just going to invite Bob to come in at this point. And Mary, if you could mute again. But Bob, did you want to come in now?
Yeah, sure. When you mentioned money bought commodities, but now it buys money, surely at some point that will implode upon itself, and you know, something catastrophic will happen.
Sorry, the thing flickered. Could you say it again? I missed it.
Well, you mentioned money used to buy commodities. Now
yes.
Money buys money to make money.
Yes.
Surely at some point that will implode upon
yes.
itself.
Yes, exactly. No. That's why I said the crises are going to get worse and worse and worse. Because the more, one of my big worries actually is about the massive international pension funds, because the governments can't let private pension funds fail. I mean, how many of us in the screen are relying on privately invested public funds? And it's searching for profit. And so you've got pension funds buying into cryptocurrencies or buying into hedge funds, or even worse, buying up third world debt and making them pay the full lot. I mean, they're doing that as well, all to search for money for the pensioners of the 40% of the world that is lucky enough to be pensioned, or some proportion like that. So in a sense, we are all part of the capitalist class who have pension funds invested in money to make money, or even in commodities. So I'm sort of beginning to think about writing about something about pension funds, but it's a political minefield, because you're touching at nearly everybody's security in the better off world, which is absolutely quite terrifying. You'd probably get locked up for it.
So just one secondary point: would we have, if that happened, would we have galloping inflation? And would, like in Germany between the wars, you'd have to take a suitcase full of money to buy a loaf of bread? Could that possibly happen?
Yes, you could still have hyperinflation, but I think you're more likely to have complete economic collapse rather than hyperinflation, where your economic system just breaks down. That is what concerns me. The actual existence of hyperinflation is very rare, because they always give the same examples. It's Weimar, it's
Zimbabwe,
it's Zimbabwe, and it's Venezuela. But in fact, you actually need inflation monetary inflation in the economy to enable your economy to grow. In fact, so a slight, like I said before, to get debt-free money and tax-free money into the system, you need a deficit. You need a public sector deficit, and you could almost argue that the source of monetary profit is what comes through from the banks and the state. Because where else is the extra money to come from if you're investing money in money to make money? It's totally Ponzi. And when it collapses, it was bad enough. In 2007-8, the north of European American economies virtually collapsed. Now, they were rescued because the bank stepped in, the government stepped in And everybody believed that the government, it was like the Wizard of Oz. The government was like the wizard behind the guy behind the curtain pulling the wheels. And everybody believed in it because it's a trust system. And if a trust system breaks down, it's like civil war. How do you put it back together again? I think the money system is so delicate, and yet the financial system is playing fast and loose with it, and nobody's stopping them. You've got all these oligarchs and billionaires and vast inequalities. You've got the radical right coming up, feeding off the discontent. And I think it's all down to the lack of democracy in the money system. You're letting the market privatize the monetary system, and it does what private sector does. It exploits everything until it breaks.
Thank you. Bob, if you could mute. Richard, could you unmute?
Yeah, thank you, Mary. Very interesting presentation. I mean, in sort of practical terms, within 2 years from now, if not less, we'll be facing a general election, and we have a Labour government consumed with the idea and the worthiness of growth. Rachel Reeves, Keir Starmer, growth, growth, growth. It's all we ever hear from people who I have pinned hopes on for something which might even vaguely resemble a better alternative than the Tories. What would you be saying to the likes of us to say to the likes of Labour, aspirational Labour leaders in the future about growth and the relevance of that creating a more equal society?
Well, they've abandoned it, haven't they? They've abandoned any element of social justice in there, or even defence of the welfare state, or any sense of progressiveness. I mean, when Starmer went and said that he wouldn't support adding the children in to more than the 2 children policy, and let alone the bedroom tax, I mean, I'm horrified. I mean, my friends are leaving the Labour Party in droves. I mean, they'll pick up all the middle of the road people who will vote for them rather than the Tories, so they'll get in, but they'll have shed their whole, socialists in general would have been shed. The growth, the reason they go for growth is because they won't challenge the inequalities of society. If they would challenge inequalities and tax the rich and take all this money, the froth of the financial markets, just a Tobin tax would and stopping them borrowing from the banks, which is effectively publicly backed money, to invest like the hedge funds do. And things like Thames, things like the Thames water thing, where the Australian bank lumbered the company with debt, spun itself off as a different company. So the debt they took the money out as dividend, and they've left the debt with the company, which is really with the poor people paying the bills, including the government. It's absolutely shocking, and the Labour Party just won't begin to even touch any of this. I mean, it's a disaster, and the only solution is going to be to split and have a genuinely socialist alternative, but that will then split the radical things, and the Tories will come through the middle, like they always do. So it's a dilemma. It's a real dilemma, and it's a pity that the Labour Party, it's so profoundly dumped Corbyn, and who had some perfectly reasonable policies, and they demonised Corbyn, which is what they do. The Labour Party does to try and get respectability, but it's dumped every single element of what could be recognised as Labour. I despair. I really despair. I haven't taken out Labour Party membership for quite some time now because I can't condone it. But I've written things to the Guardian, and I've put things to Labour Party branches, and they put these things forward. It's not that the Labour Party branches are agreeing with this. It's the parliamentary party that's saving its own skin, I think.
It is. I mean, it is it's desperately disappointing, because you'd like to think that post Corbyn there will be at least some sort of residual kind of understanding about an alternative way of looking at things. We haven't really touched on the environment, climate change, and these dreadful things which are going on around us, and how vital the decommodifying of money would help that whole process towards a more environmentally sustainable world. And yes, there is a failure in the narrative with Labour, And that's one of the biggest problems we've got in terms of fighting the Tories and fighting for a better future.
Yeah. Well, the Labour's almost been overtaken by the Tories on the environment, haven't they? Just about.
Seems
I mean,
to be.
even though, you know, Monbiot says Sunak doesn't get it, or Zach Goldsmith said that Sunak doesn't get it, but he seems to get it more than Starmer. Oh, it's just pathetic, absolutely pathetic.
But just to add in here, I mean, the Green Party, which we may have hoped would have perhaps, they've also adopted more neoliberal policies recently as well. So even a party of opposition, like the Greens, have swallowed the handbag economics.
Yes, they have. They have. And I think it's because it's so simplistic. It's so having the country as a household is such a simplistic idea that it's very difficult to break out of that. But you just thought with all the money that the state poured into during the pandemic, it supported the whole private sector virtually. And yet nobody is saying that public money is the most important. I'm trying to argue the public economy is the most important economy, not the private sector. The private sector is the parasite on the public ability to make money and circulate, to circulate and provide the validity of a money system.
Absolutely. I mean, the popularity of the ideas of nationalisation of water, the pollution which goes on of our lakes, our rivers, and of these enormous profits which the gas companies are now making, as well as the oil companies. I mean, there is public revulsion at all of this, and so the policies that you're advocating, Mary, are completely acceptable from my point of view. State control, but with democratic accountability and quantification of money, and I think that's got to be it. It's just got to be this idea that the state should be given through the control to the people the use of money as we need it. Okay. Anyway, we must end it. We must end on a positive note, whatever happens.
Yeah. Thank you, Richard. Lynn, if you want to come in at this point.
Thank you. Am I heard?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, great. Yeah, first of all, I'd just like to comment on what you've just been talking about, and to mention the fact that knowing that Keir Starmer is the only politician ever to have been invited to join the Trilateral Commission and accepted. I think that throws quite a lot of light on, you know, how the Labour Party, how the Labour Party are acting now. I mean, you know, this explains all their non-socialism, basically, from my point of view. But my main question was going to be, I understand, and I would really appreciate your comments on the fact that the 1% of the global population that truly control our economic system effectively, certainly the power base, I understand that they have a completely different, separate fiscal way of behaving between themselves. Do you have any comment on that? So they basically perform through their own private banks. And I'd love to know how that relates, if this is true, how that relates to, you know, the general economy.
Yeah, we're edging in on conspiracy theory here, which worries me a little bit, because if we think about the banks being people colluding to organize against the people, then you do get into that kind of conspiracy theories, which the Americans particularly love, a conspiracy theory. I don't see it as that. I don't see it as people colluding. I think probably, as far as my view, the bankers are doing what they think is best. I don't think they've got a meaning to exploit people. I think they're just following the logic of what they've learned in being bankers. Now you do banking, and they do collaborate with each other to sort things out. And there's a Bank of International Settlements, and they step in to try and smooth things out. And I think they're doing it probably with the best possible motives. So I take a structural rather than a conspiratorial view. So I think they're probably doing their best. But the sum total of what they do just reinforces the system, because they don't understand it either. yeah, but where they do, like Bern Bernanke, he said that he makes money, he creates money out of fresh air. He's actually said it in black and white. It's in his book, you know, money is created out of fresh air. And so they acknowledge it, but the politically it's not getting picked up. If the Fed can create money out of fresh air, then you've got big political questions about what does the Fed do with that money, because it's public money, it's our money, and it should be. So democratizing money to me is the campaign source of campaign. So I don't think there's ill will in the bankers. I think there's just ill structures, which they just do they fill their slots and do what their slots determine. I think that's how I see it.
Mm.
Thank you.
Stan, Stan, can you unmute? You had a question in the chat. Did you want to follow that up? I don't know if it's been answered or not. Stan, are you there? Perhaps he's not there anymore. Okay, does anybody else wish to speak? Stan seems to have disappeared. Roy, you've got your hand up. I can see you've got your hand. So you'd like to unmute? Or is that Martha that wants to speak?
Yeah, developing the theme of, you know, the collapse of the international economy as it's presently constructed. I mean, there's been a lot of profits, and Piquet, the French economist, has forecast, you know, the present system is totally unsustainable. He's based that on evidence that goes back to the 17th century. But there are possibly elements where, if you want to call it neo-Keynesian policies, can just about succeed in certain circumstances. If you look at Japan, for example, relating to what Richard said and concepts of growth, the Japanese economy has been dormant or hasn't improved for about 20 years. And yet the Japanese people haven't got the levels of inequality, according to Wilkinson, the spirit level and so on, that exist in other so-called Western European countries. So I pose the question, I think Piquet is probably right, although many economists have refined his analysis, but can the present problems as perceived by us be rescued by more interplay with the 1%? I mean, you've just made the statement that they're probably reasonable people, that they got the wrong theory, but according to their warp theory, the practice is right. Politically, how can an impact be made on the powers that be? It's a political dimension, and the political mechanisms don't exist at the present time. So are we going round and round in circles? I'm not a social democrat. I consider myself to be a socialist, you know, and the whole system's wrong. But you know, billions of people out there who are going along with what we might call the present neoliberal policies. You know, it's almost an impossible scenario against the backdrop of environmental catastrophe.
I think the answer is really that we've got to find some very simple ways of verbalizing the situation, in the same way that the neoliberals have simplified theirs with this analogy of the state as household. We've got to find a form of words that you know, people can grasp hold of. I think, you know, and I don't know. I mean, I feel that I've spent all these 20 years on doing these books and written these books, which is as best I can. But you know, I feel that there's got to be another generation that picks it up, really. But it's okay. I've got one. So yeah, yeah. What you're saying is the frustration I have, really. that I'm doing my best to spread the words and spread the ideas, and trying to simplify them as best I can. But yeah, I keep wondering what is the logjam? What is it that's not being said, that we're not doing, that's not getting through? And I haven't come up with it yet. And I hope somebody somewhere will come up with it.
I mean, I think it would be true to say that ISW has played its part in trying to get this message across in its own little way. I mean, we had Richard Murphy talking about modern monetary theory during the COVID period when we just started doing Zoom to introduce us to modern monetary theory. And now we've got you, Mary, talking about it. So I think we try to get the message at least to ourselves to start with, because we need to understand it in order to spread the message, I suppose. And of course, a member who's not here tonight, Derek Curlis, who contacted you, Mary, is very keen and so often circulates the blog from Richard Murphy about, and I also follow Richard Murphy's tweets, where he's constantly tweeting on and trying to get the message across about these issues. But then that's enough of me speaking. But Stan, you had a question, but also you put your hand up. So do you want to unmute?
Good evening. What can we do as individuals going forward? And a router to that is I struggle constantly all the time where to put my pension, ethical banks, ethical building societies. So, I mean, what can we do as individuals?
Yeah. Well, making personal lifestyle choices obviously is one thing you can do, but that's just one small breath in the wind. It's just so I wouldn't agonize too much about where your pension is, because
I do.
Yeah, I know. Well, yeah, I know, because and I've raised the question of pensions there, which is probably it comes very close to home, doesn't it? Really. But I think what I say normally is, thank you for coming on and listening to me and thinking about these ideas, because that's important. And I think the more groups there are like yours that are trying to struggle with these ideas and take them on board and then think them through as to what the next level is, then I mean, perhaps that's good. I'm getting asked to give these talks, and Richard's giving these talks. And there's other people like us who've been working on this stuff. So I think just spread the word if you can. If you find interesting things, pass them on, and see if we can build up a bank of knowledge and a bank of people who understand, that can support each other and start putting these things in the political arena. I mean, ideally, the Labour Party shouldn't be where it is now. It should have been starting 10 years ago, starting to question neoliberalism. And when the pandemic, it should have been questioning, the importance or applauding the state's rescue of the private sector and say how wonderful the state is to have done it. But then you see the left has always been suspicious of the state as well. So if you're talking about the money system, you are talking about the state, and perhaps we've got to. I mean, I use the concept the public normally when I'm talking about. I don't talk about state. I talk about the public economy and the public money, and stress the public and democratizing. Because I think the most socialist thing we've had in the last century was the welfare state. That is, we collectively took responsibility for the people who. To balance our society and increase social justice, and the Labour Party is not even defending that. But you start with the welfare state and say it isn't a burden on the rest of the private world. In fact, the private world is a burden on the welfare state. Politically, we've got to make these points, but. Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of frustrated because because of the Parkinson's, I'm losing the articulacy I used to have. I mean, I used to be able to give a talk like this right off the top of my head and go on for hours. And now I'm struggling even to comprehend the questions you're asking me, because I can't quite make the connection. So I'm struggling, and sort of, and so I'm looking to other people who are more articulate than me to kind of pick the ball up and run with it, because I'm dropping it at the moment.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you. I mean, I think one of the examples which I often try to articulate, but not always successfully, to illustrate this is during the COVID period, when suddenly the state took on, as Mary, you said, a huge role in supporting both local and national economy and pumped in billions of pounds. They found the money, they found the magic money tree, and they had to pump it into things which were socially useful and also to protect the collapse of the private sector. I mean, the private sector, because of lockdown, would have collapsed without state intervention and support. My next door neighbour is a small businessman, and he survived. His business survived through lockdown as a result of government intervention, and they found the money for that. And likewise, people who weren't working, people not getting wages, weren't working. That scheme was just costing billions. And where was the inflation? It didn't create inflation, as often neoliberals would suggest. In fact, we were heading for serious depression at that time, but it saved it. Likewise, before COVID, the collapse of the banking system was rescued by Gordon Brown, pumping, and the Federal Reserve Bank in the US and the European Central Bank, pumping billions and billions of pounds into the financial sector to rescue it. And so the finance sector and private industry is hugely dependent upon the state and the intervention of state banks to protect them. So why can't we use that money for other purposes? We don't need to pour it into private sector banks. We could pour it into increasing benefit levels. We could double, triple benefit levels for people on benefits. Why not? Why give billions to the financial sector rather than billions to ordinary people in order to enable them to live?
That is the critical question. Yeah.
The crucial question, though, that I always ask myself, it's always in the back of my mind, is: are there limits to this? What limit? At what point could a socialist government, assuming it happened, create money? Is there we'd like to think that they could keep doing it, but what are the consequences if they keep doing it? Is that what happened in Venezuela? Is that what happened in Zimbabwe, that they went too far?
No.
And suddenly there was hyperinflation. Is there somehow a balance to be met between creating public money, giving it to people that need it, but at what point do you need to stop, perhaps, or not do it?
Well, the three cases that you talked, Zimbabwe, Weimar, and Venezuela, it was all because of sanctions and breaking and reparations and the fractured and the breakdown of the economy in Zimbabwe when they took over all the land and they didn't, didn't have the farming expertise and things. So it wasn't the money system is blamed, but it's the economy that broke and that caused the problem. No,
so it was a supply side collapse rather than a demand.
Yes.
Too much demand.
They talk about balancing the books, and what they mean, neoliberals mean, is state doesn't spend more than it does in taxation, but that's not the thing that needs to be balanced. What you need to balance is between state spending and the pressure on the private sector, assuming you have a market sector anyway, which I assume we would have mixed economies. We're unlikely to take a Soviet model. We're likely to take a mixed economy, which is go back to where we were in the middle of the last century. So, oh God, I've lost my train of thought. Remind me again what you said, and I'll pick it up again.
Is there a limit to the extent to which you can extend?
That's the role of taxation. If basically when the government makes a budget, it's actually exercising a creation of money, because there isn't a pool of money, there isn't a piggy bank, there isn't a mine of money. Basically, the government says it's going to spend this much, however it is, less, twice as much, 5 times as much. Now, what it needs to do then is, I propose that you have a participatory budgeting method where people contribute to how much they want the state to be, how big they want the state to be. And of course, given the choice, people make the state much, much larger, like more on the hospitals, more on the schools, more on everything like that. Then I think this should then flow through to what I would call a monetary sort of monitoring committee, which would be like the monetary committee they've got in the Bank of England now. But it would be responsible for saying, what is the likely impact of this level of government expenditure on the market sector? And then to make an analysis of how much you need to reclaim of that money through taxation and other charges you put on. So you do need to solve the problem of inflation, but you do it by the tax system doesn't create the money to fund the public sector. The tax system retrieves the money that the public sector's put in and retrieves it so that it doesn't have an inflationary impact. Because the one point the MMT people often make is you can circulate as much money as you want as long as you don't, you've got the demand in the economy, you've got the supply in the economy that meets the demand. And so the balance is between how much you claw back from what you've circulated and how much you spend, and it can be any level you want, as long as so we don't have high taxes because to enable high expenditure. If you have high expenditure, you need to have high taxes to retrieve as much of that money as possible, because the balance between the public and the private sector is getting, in some countries like Finland, the public sector is bigger than the private sector. So
but you'd have, instead of the current Bank of England Monetary Committee having sole responsibility for interest rates, you'd give them responsibility for tax policy.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, that's what I would do. You do need monetary monitoring, because you do need to avoid I mean, like QE has caused inflation in the financial sector, like I said. So it is inflationary if you do it in the wrong way. But the assumption that the critique of hyperinflation is, if the government spends money or prints money, it will be inflationary. That isn't true. It could be inflationary, but it doesn't need to be. And as we're all saying, the pandemic, it wasn't inflationary. It's been inflationary afterwards because there's too much money and the system's breaking and the supply systems are breaking. But that's not the fault of the money. It's the fault of the lack of supply, and there need to be a balance to rectify that.
Is it not the case that the current inflation is being driven by the massive profits of multinational companies, the oil companies, the water companies? They're the drivers of inflation.
Yeah, as is the high price of borrowing money. I mean, the idea that somehow you drive money out of the system by raising interest rates, you just make the borrowing of money the firms have to invest to do any of their production. They pay more and more for their money, so they put their prices up. I mean, how the hell they don't see that they're causing inflation, not driving it out.
Except interest rates on things like mortgages just make many more people poorer and homeless.
Yes.
I noticed there's another couple of questions in the chat from Mary Fletcher. Mary, did you want, and from Lynn Savage as well, Salvage, did you want to come back, either of you, Lynn or Mary?
I've already spoken, thank you, about mine.
Okay. Anybody else want to come back at this? Any further questions? Otherwise, I'm going to move towards winding up. I mean, it's gone 8:15, and Mary, you must be starting to feel tired now.
Yeah, I'm getting tired. I will get less and less articulate, so it's I'm getting less used to you. But please have the paper, have copies of the paper, and if you'd like to read copies of my book where I explain things more fully.
Absolutely, absolutely. Now, Mary, just before you go,
yeah.
We have a policy at ISW that for speakers, we're happy to make a donation from our funds. We're not a poor organisation. We're not rich, but we're not poor. To a cause of your choice. If you'd like to email Derek, who's the treasurer of ISW, right, to let him know what your cause of choice would be, we're happy to make a donation from our funds to that. So you may have a particular cause that you want us to support.
Well, one that was in the paper today was a FARE, F-A-R-E, which is for children for food through the holidays. That seems to be something we immediately do. An envelope came through in the Guardian today. I don't know if anybody saw it, but
if you could email perhaps details to Derek, then that would be great. I'm going to stop the recording now, but I'm going to continue the meeting for just a little bit longer to give some announcements. So I'm going to stop the recording. But thank you very much, Mary, and I found this meeting really excellent, and hopefully it will provide another springboard for greater activity around popularising some of the themes that we've pursued in today's meeting. So thank you very much indeed.
Well, thank you for listening.
No problem.
And
so in the usual way.
Thank you. No,
thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm going to stop recording now.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for listening.